For my senior project, I started a podcast. The podcast had everything to do with the youth. I spoke a lot about the youth because at the time I was going through a lot in high school. I didn't feel like I had a voice at home or in school. My friends and I, like we would always get together. We would always have conversations about stuff that we were going through. One day I said, hey, let's start a podcast. It was funny to think about because as soon as we stopped our podcast, it was when podcasts became like super popular. It was just cool to see that we started it right before the trends. We spoke a bunch about what the youth was affected by, specifically in high school, whether it be at home and stuff like that. And I am kind of confused with details, but somehow around the same time, the Gandhi was starting their podcast. And Christina, shout out Christina, we have not had too many one-on-ones, but Christina is who put me on to the Gandhi Institute. She spoke to a teacher of mine, Miss Feretta Baker. And I think there was communication between them that the Gandhi kind of needed some assistance with getting started. They didn't know where to start or what kind of conversations to have. Feretta introduced me, and then I started here. I got really close to Aaron, Katie, and Mike, and we started the podcast for a couple weeks, and I was still working at a restaurant. And while I was working there, it was horrible. I kind of didn't want to work there anymore, and I really loved how, and I've spoke to Aaron about this, how it seems like everyone here was working for the good of the community, like for no pay. And not to say that no one here is getting paid, but it seemed like everyone was doing it for the sake of just being good. I loved the environment. I loved the fact that we had check-ins and everyone was super into knowing what everyone was going through and wanting to show their support. I was like, hey, Aaron, I got to work here. Where do you see a position? And we spoke for a couple months, and he communicated that Natasha was leaving and he would need another support staff in schools. I really felt that it was a full circle moment. I was working with youth for so long, and that was my focus. That was like my podcast. It was a big part of who I was at that time. And so it was really cool to hear Aaron say, hey, you'll be working with students again. And
Wow.
here we are. Yeah.
Wow, Jordan, that is really a full circle moment, being a student yourself to now being a support system
Yeah.
for students. How relatable.
Yeah. And I think it's really crucial, not even just myself, but having help zones. I talked to Esther about this, my girlfriend, the other day, how crucial it is to have help zones. Thinking back to the fact that we didn't have help zones, to see that this is such a need now, and to think about how it could have affected students earlier if we had people working on these things. I think it's really cool to think about.
Speaking of, you're working now in the help zone. Tell us about your work. What are some of the aspects that you love and are passionate about? What are the aspects that are challenging? How would you describe?
I feel like the role itself is so broad that it's hard to answer. First off, when there's a need, then there's communication within whatever system I'm in, whether that be a school, whether that be here at the house, mostly in schools, obviously. But we communicate what that need is. I'm a part of the team which helps assist in what needs to happen to make change within the school. Initially, I was bridging the gap between students, teachers, and parents and trying to get that communication all on the same page. This year specifically, or at least this week, I've been focusing on options and strategies other than screaming, other than yelling, other than cursing, that would help students be successful in the classroom. A lot of students get sent to my classroom because they're getting in arguments with the teacher or they disagree on a certain thing in the room. And I'm like, hey, I understand it. I get it. You know, you don't want to come in at school at 6 o'clock every day, leave at 2:30, have a teacher telling you what to do, where to go, when to leave, when to go to the bathroom, when to eat. It sounds like prison, if I can be completely honest with you. Yeah. And so I think my role is to make everyone as comfortable as possible in an uncomfortable situation. I think school and learning is a need, but it's very obvious, specifically to students, how boring being in school could be. And so I think it's crucial that we as staff, we as teachers, we as principals, we acknowledge that school can sometimes be quite boring and make those changes to make sure students are engaged in the classroom, engaged in the work, and at the end of the day, they want to come to school. That's my role, thinking of how I can get kids into the classroom, how I can keep kids in the classroom. And if they're not comfortable in the classroom, what I can do and what changes we can all make in order to make sure they are, you know? Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense why that question is hard to answer.
Yeah.
Because there's so many aspects to that. It seems like you're creating a new social system that centers relationship needs and that creating a support network.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Esther and I spoke the other day, and she said something that I don't think was wrong, but I kind of explained how certain words can be interpreted certain ways. And so she says, "Oh, Jordan, do you think you're making like really big change?" And it was something that I like really like sat with for a second. When people hear change, they think of it kind of immediate or maybe kind of drastic. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think that my role is not making big drastic change, but I think I'm making small effects, changing students and even teachers and staff members, their everyday routines, right? Those little details, those little routines, then they transfer to big change, right? What are we gonna do next year? This year, we're focused on the now. For example, I have a student who gets really angry really easily. And so we've been working on different strategies to release some of that anger without yelling at the teacher, without cursing, without fighting someone, right? And she's been doing really good recently. And she's been like visiting me and my class. Like I told her the other day, I'd rather you come in here for 5 minutes and do all the screaming and yelling that you're gonna do out in the classroom with the teacher. I'd rather you do that in here because I know that your yelling isn't at me. You just need to release that somehow. I'd rather you do it in here than out there in the classroom and get in trouble for it, right? Eventually, when these students are 16, right, 21, 52, instead of using their anger for the worst possible thing, now you have options. Now you have a lot of these strategies, so you're not releasing your anger in very negative, big ways that affect other people. Yeah.
It sounds like you are a change maker and that you plant the seeds for change. And there's many, many conditions for something to grow, right? It could be part of nourishing and planting them seeds for change. And it's beautiful. I'm so grateful to
Thank
do
you.
a bit more. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you for the work you do.